My name's Lily, and I'm 25 years old. At this point in my life, I feel like I'm in my prime, confident, fit, and comfortable in my skin. Whenever I walk into a room, I can sense people noticing me, and while I don't crave attention, it's hard to ignore. My uncle lives with his son, Aaron, who's my cousin. We grew up together but hadn't seen each other much over the last few years. When I arrived, I noticed right away that he had changed. We both had. Aaron, now in his mid-20s, was in great shape, more mature and stronger than the boy I used to know. There was something about the way he looked at me that first day that stirred an unexpected feeling inside of me. I got out of the car, greeted my uncle, and as we made our way inside, I couldn't help but feel Aaron's gaze follow me. His eyes lingered, scanning me in a way that felt less like family and more like something else. I wore a light dress that accentuated my figure, and while I wasn't trying to make a statement, it was clear that Aaron had taken notice. We exchanged small talk, but his eyes kept wandering, and I began to wonder if he was thinking the same thing I was. It was an odd feeling. We were cousins, after all. But there was an undeniable tension in the air. My uncle, always welcoming, had prepared my guest room in advance, and after the usual pleasantries, he excused himself, mentioning he'd be away at work for most of the week. That left just Aaron and me alone in the house. As the day wore on, the feeling only grew stronger. After unpacking my bags, I decided to change into something more comfortable. I slipped into a fitted bikini and threw on a light cover-up. The countryside heat was intense, and the idea of lounging by the pool seemed perfect. When I walked outside, I found Aaron sitting by the pool, distracted by his phone. I approached, pretending not to notice the way his eyes immediately locked onto me. "Hey," I said casually, "would you mind putting some sunscreen on my back? The sun's brutal today." I handed him the bottle without waiting for an answer and turned my back to him, letting my cover-up slip off slightly. Aaron hesitated for a moment, but then agreed. His hands felt a little unsteady at first, as if he didn't quite know where to touch, but I could feel him relax as he continued rubbing the sunscreen onto my back. The more he touched me, the more the tension between us built. It was subtle but powerful, and I could feel his breath growing heavier as his hands wandered lower down my back. We spent the rest of the afternoon by the pool, the unspoken tension only growing stronger. Later that evening, I suggested we watch a movie. "Let's relax," I said casually, though I knew neither of us would be able to. I took a shower and put on a loose tank top and shorts, comfortable, but just revealing enough to catch his eye again. We settled onto the couch, the movie playing in the background, but my attention wasn't on the screen. As we sat there, the air between us thickened, and I caught Aaron's stealing glances at me. I smiled to myself, enjoying the effect I seemed to have on him. "I'm a bit sore after all that swimming," I said, looking at him through half-lidded eyes. "Care to give me a massage?" He didn't hesitate this time. I laid down on the living room rug, adjusting myself in a way that showed off the curve of my back. His hands started off gentle, almost hesitant, but as the minutes passed, his touch grew bolder. Every time his fingers brushed against my skin, I felt a rush of heat through my body. At one point, I sat up, pulling my tank top off with a casual smile. "It's more comfortable this way," I teased. Aaron's breath hitched, but he didn't pull away. His hands moved with more confidence, exploring my body with a boldness that hadn't been there before. The night carried on like that, the tension between us finally breaking through the surface. It was a game, a dangerous one, but we both knew we were playing it willingly. The boundary of family didn't seem to matter anymore. It was just us, two people lost in the heat of the moment, drawn to each other in a way neither of us could resist. As the night progressed, we found ourselves on the living room floor, wrapped in each other, every touch more intense than the last. The world outside seemed to disappear, and it was just the two of us, giving in to the pull that had been building all day. We lay there afterward, breathless, the air still heavy with everything that had just happened. I knew we were treading dangerous waters, but I also knew that this was only the beginning of a week that would change everything. As we lay there, the weight of what had just happened began to settle over us. Aaron's arm was draped loosely around my waist, his breath slowly returning to normal, while mine still raced from the intensity of the moment. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the ceiling fans spinning above us. The movie had long since faded into the background, forgotten amidst everything that had unfolded between us. I turned my head slightly to look at him. His eyes were closed, and he seemed calm. Too calm, considering the storm we had just weathered. My mind was spinning, a whirl of emotions colliding all at once. What we had done was dangerous, crossing a line that should have remained untouched, but I couldn't deny how alive I felt. The thrill, the heat, the sheer intensity of it all was still coursing through my veins. "I guess we've made things a little complicated," I said softly, breaking the silence. My voice sounded steadier than I felt, trying to navigate the tangle of emotions this night had left behind. Aaron opened his eyes, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yeah," he replied, his tone surprisingly light. "But it was bound to happen, wasn't it?" I raised an eyebrow, surprised by his confidence. "You think so?" He shrugged, his hand brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I've felt it for a while," he admitted. "The way things have changed between us. It's been in the air for years." I sat up slightly, propping myself on my elbow as I looked down at him. "You felt it too?" He nodded, his smile fading a little as he met my gaze, his expression now serious. "We both did, Lily. I could see it in the way you looked at me, the way we kept finding reasons to talk, to be around each other. We just never acknowledged it before now." His words struck me harder than I expected. He was right. This pull, this tension had been simmering below the surface for a long time, but we had never let it reach this point. Maybe it was because we knew how risky it was. Or maybe we had just been waiting for the right moment. And tonight had been that moment. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice a little quieter this time. Aaron didn't answer right away. He sat up, his fingers tracing lazy circles on the skin of my arm as he seemed to think. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but certain. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I do know this, we can't pretend nothing happened. We've crossed a line, and it's going to change things." I nodded. I had expected that answer, but hearing it made the reality sink in deeper. We couldn't undo what we had done, and there was no going back to the way things were before. But was I ready for that? To accept the consequences of what we had just started? As if sensing my hesitation, Aaron gently cupped my face in his hand, tilting my chin so that our eyes met again. "I'm not saying we have to figure it all out right now," he said quietly. "But maybe we can just take things as they come. One step at a time." His words offered a strange kind of comfort. Maybe it didn't have to be so complicated. Maybe we could just see where this new path led us, without overthinking it. The idea of letting go of all the uncertainty, and just enjoying whatever this was, whatever it would become, seemed like the only thing that made sense. "Yeah," I agreed after a moment, relaxing slightly. "One step at a time." A slow smile spread across Aaron's face, and for the first time that night, the tension between us seemed to lift a little, replaced by something quieter, a sense of ease, of understanding. We sat there for a while longer, the silence between us no longer heavy but comfortable. There were no promises, no plans for what came next. Just the knowledge that we were in this together, whatever this would turn into. After a few minutes, Aaron stood and extended a hand to me, helping me up from the floor. "I think we should clean up a little before my dad gets back," he said with a grin. I laughed, the sound light and easy, and for the first time since I arrived, I felt a little of the tension ease out of my body. As we headed toward the bathroom to wash away the remnants of the night, I realized that no matter how complicated things became, there was a part of me that was excited for what lay ahead. This week was going to be unforgettable. The following days unfolded in a way that neither of us could have predicted. The tension between Aaron and me didn't disappear. If anything, it became even more palpable, like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap at any moment. But we didn't rush into anything. There was no pressure, no urgency. We spent our days as we always did during these family visits, going for walks in the fields, talking late into the night, sharing stories about our lives since we'd last seen each other. But everything felt different now. There was a new layer to our conversations, a silent understanding that we both shared. The attraction, the unspoken connection, was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. One evening, after a quiet dinner, we found ourselves alone again in the living room. The sun had set, casting the room in a soft, dim light. I stretched out on the couch, feeling the warmth of the evening air settle over me. Aaron sat nearby, his eyes flickering toward me now and then, his body language still relaxed but alert, as if waiting for something. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us. He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful. "I'm thinking about us," he said honestly. "About how different things feel now." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. Everything had shifted between us, but it wasn't just about what had happened that first night. It was about the way we saw each other now, the way we responded to each other's presence. We were playing a game, but it was one we both wanted to play, and there was no telling how far it would go. As the days passed, that unspoken connection between Aaron and me continued to deepen. The moments we shared were quiet but intense, like a fire that had been lit and was slowly growing stronger with every glance, every touch. We moved through the week pretending everything was normal, but both of us knew that something had shifted irreversibly. One afternoon, while my aunt was out running errands, Aaron suggested we take a walk through the woods behind the house. I agreed, eager to escape the confines of the house, where the tension felt almost too thick to breathe. The air outside was cool, the smell of pine and earth surrounding us as we ventured into the woods, the sunlight filtering through the trees in soft golden rays. We didn't talk much at first, just walked side by side, the sounds of nature filling the silence between us. But even out here, away from the house and the weight of everything that had happened, the tension remained. It was as if the quiet between us was buzzing with anticipation, waiting for one of us to acknowledge it. As we reached a small clearing, Aaron stopped and turned to face me. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the mix of desire and hesitation that mirrored my own. "Lily," he began, his voice low, "I've been trying to wrap my head around all of this." I crossed my arms, trying to guard myself against the vulnerability that was beginning to creep in. "I know," I said softly. "Me too." He stepped closer, his gaze locking onto mine. "This thing between us, it's real, isn't it? It's not just some passing moment, or something we can just brush off and forget." I didn't answer right away because deep down, I knew he was right. It wasn't just a fleeting spark that would die out as quickly as it had ignited. It was something deeper, something that had been growing for much longer than either of us had realized. And now, there was no denying it. "No, it's not," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's more than that." Aaron's eyes softened at my words, and for a moment, we stood there in the quiet of the woods, just looking at each other. Then, without a word, he reached out and took my hand, his fingers warm against mine. "Maybe we don't have to figure everything out right now," he said, his tone gentle. "But I don't want to keep pretending this doesn't exist." I swallowed, my heart pounding in my chest as I nodded in agreement. The truth was, I didn't want to pretend either. The tension, the attraction, it was all too real, too strong to ignore. We could play it safe, pretend it was just a momentary lapse, but deep down, I knew that wouldn't last. Whatever this was, it had already taken root, and there was no going back. Aaron squeezed my hand, pulling me closer until I was standing right in front of him. His eyes searched mine, and I could see the question there, unspoken but clear. And in that moment, I made a decision. Without thinking, I leaned forward, closing the distance between us and pressing my lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if we were both testing the waters. But within seconds, it deepened, the intensity building as our bodies responded to each other in a way that felt both familiar and entirely new. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me against him as the kiss grew more urgent, more desperate. My hands found their way to the back of his neck, my fingers tangling in his hair as I lost myself in the heat of the moment. Every lingering touch, every press of his lips against mine sent a surge of electricity through my body, and I knew I couldn't stop this even if I wanted to. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathless, our foreheads resting against each other as we tried to steady our breathing. The world around us seemed to disappear, leaving just the two of us standing there in the clearing, caught up in a whirlwind of emotions neither of us had expected. That felt. I started, my voice trailing off as I searched for the right words. Aaron smiled softly, brushing a stray hair from my face. Yeah, he agreed. It did. For a few moments, we just stood there in the quiet, holding each other, letting the weight of what had just happened sink in. There was no need for words. We both knew what this meant. Eventually, we made our way back to the house, our hands still intertwined. The walk back was quieter, but the silence between us felt different now, not heavy with unspoken tension, but filled with a quiet understanding. We didn't have to rush into anything or figure out where this was all going. All that mattered was that we were on the same page, ready to see where this path would lead. That evening, after my aunt had returned home and settled in for the night, Aaron and I found ourselves alone once again in the living room. The air was still thick with the energy of the day, and though we had agreed to take things one step at a time, there was no denying the pull between us. We sat close together on the couch, our bodies almost touching, but not quite. The TV was on, playing some random show that neither of us was paying attention to, our focus entirely on each other. The tension from earlier had returned, humming quietly beneath the surface, and I could feel the anticipation building between us. I keep thinking about today, Aaron said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He glanced over at me, his eyes filled with that same mix of desire and uncertainty. I smiled softly, turning to face him. Me too. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, the weight of everything that had happened hanging in the air between us. Then, slowly, Aaron reached out and took my hand, his thumb gently brushing over my knuckles. We don't have to rush, he said, his voice steady. But I don't want to pretend anymore. Neither did I. This wasn't a game anymore. This was real. And we were both ready to see where it would take us. With a slow, deliberate movement, I leaned in, closing the distance between us once more. Our lips met in a soft, lingering kiss, and just like before, the intensity between us flared to life instantly. The rest of the world fell away, leaving only the two of us, tangled in a moment we had both been waiting for longer than we cared to admit. There was no going back now. We were in this together. And whatever came next, we would face it side by side.